Hey, I'm Follygon, and I love taking awesome 2D artwork and transforming it into 3D through a process called digital sculpting, which is just like traditional sculpting, except it's on a computer. This time around, I'm creating an artwork from Loish, or Lois van Baarle, and if you don't know who she is, well, I don't really know what to tell you. She is probably one of the most famous artists around right now, and for good reason. Her artwork is, in one word, magical. She is one of the most consistent artists online. When you see her art, you immediately know it's her. But before we get in and work on Loish's character, click that subscribe button if you're new around here, and check out the links in the description for my Patreon, my online store, and my mentorship program, the Appeal Academy. I've sculpted a ton of different characters in the past. Most recently, I did Lord Griss's artwork of a Pineberry girl. And if you want to check out more 3D art videos, I have plenty here on my channel. And down in the description, you can find some links to some of my favorite videos. All right, let's get started. And of course, the way we're going to do that is with a blank canvas and a ball of digital clay. The foundation for anything is the most important part, and often that foundation looks quite ugly. But it's not meant to be beautiful. It's meant to be the building blocks to carry you forward. So often we get caught up trying to make everything perfect right away. But these things take time. Art is hard, even when you do it on a computer like me. And I hope that when you watch a short time lapse like this video, that you don't get discouraged. Things can fly by so quickly that it seems like I've made this entire character in 10 minutes. But in truth, I spent about 3 weeks working on and off to get the finished result that you'll see here soon. Not to mention, editing this video took time as well. It's really easy to see tons of finished work online in the infinite scroll that is social media. But people rarely see all of the hard work, the struggle that goes into something. You see the highly edited time-lapse or the super polished render. And you see tons of these whenever you hop on social media. Not to mention the years and years of experience professional artists have in their back pocket that lets them do things in an hour that may take someone else an entire week. I have this little quote on the inside of my watch band, per aspera ad astra, which roughly translates to through struggle to the stars. And yeah, it's a little corny, but it's also true. And it's something you won't hear a lot of professional artists talk about. Art is really hard, and if you are struggling, I want you to know that every single artist that has ever, quote, made it has gone through struggle. Heck, I've been a working professional for years. I've worked on things like Pokemon, Marvel, Clash of Clans, and a lot more, and still, I go through periods of struggle. Everyone does. Almost every project I work on has some struggle. This one included. One thing that was really tough with this illustration in general was the lighting. It's not physically accurate, which isn't a huge deal, but when you have all these crazy reds and blues all over a character, it can make for a really tough way to kind of replicate that in 3D. And that's what I have going on behind me on this character's arm, showing the actual sampled lighting if I were to hand paint it directly on the character. So if I wanted to get that to match, as perfectly as I could, it would be really tough and it would probably look really awkward in 3D, and I wouldn't be able to light it with, lights, physically accurate lighting, because it just simply isn't in 2D. A lot of artists may say one step at a time, but for sculpture, it's almost the complete opposite. Big picture, yes, but you don't want to sit down and try to make something like the eyes 100% perfect before you even start working on the nose. I try to make everything at the same level of finish so that nothing gets left behind as I make progress. In some ways, this can be a little difficult because it seems like it's slow going. A small tweak here, a little change there, and then you take a step back and you can't even tell a difference from where you started to where you are now. Trust me, I know that feeling very well. But the pros of this process definitely outweigh the cons. If you spend a lot of time working in one area like your eyes, it's very likely that you will not get that area correct. The reason for this is that everything that surrounds your eye affects the shapes there too. Even shapes way down by your mouth. Try smiling right now. Go ahead. I know it might be tough for some of us, but at least give it a shot. When you smile and move the corners of your lips up, your cheeks raise up and push your lower eyelids up as well. See, so much of this stuff is interconnected, and it's important not to get too focused in one spot and forget about the whole. I definitely felt like I was making a million small changes on this character, In particular, the hair on this girl was just absolutely insane. So many twisting and intermingling pieces, so much time spent studying the image to better understand what Loish's intention was. Getting inside the head of the original designer is so important for projects like this one here. Taking the time to look at each individual piece of hair and then replicate that in 3D, while also making sure that it looks good from other angles as well. Sorry about that, I'm not sure what came over me. Well, anyway, this isn't easy, and that is why it's important to find areas where you can save time. As a digital sculptor, a skill that's really valuable to learn is time management. And a place where I really like to save time is on not sculpting things that will never be seen. So maybe a hand inside of a glove, or a foot in a shoe, or a strap tucking down into a sweater, which is what we have going on behind me. None of the information below the sweater, the character's body, a sports bra, anything else like that is never going to be seen, so there's no real reason for me to take the time to create that. You might want to do it if you wanted to check on proportions or help you figure out some of the folds for the fabric or anything like that, but other than that, there's no real point to doing it. So learn to save time and you'll be a lot faster when you go to sculpt your next character. Refinement. The process of removing impurities or unwanted elements. A purification process. That sounds a little too grandiose for my taste, so I like to think of refinement as taking what you already have and making it look gooder. That's much more my speed. This stage is difficult to talk about, but if you have a really solid foundation that you have built up slowly over time, this process becomes almost therapeutic. This is when I typically turn on a podcast or some chill tunes and almost zone out. It's easy to let your mind slip away and go into automation mode here. But don't let that happen. You have to stay focused on what you're doing. When we go into autopilot, that is when we end up wasting time and energy. A lot of people like to talk about practice and how important it is, but just like the refinement stage of sculpture, if you aren't focused, well, then all that work that you're doing isn't really going to do a whole lot of good. So take breaks often so that you can take a step back and make sure you're being intentional. Sculpting is a long process, and I like to say it's a combination of a lot of really small changes that eventually lead up into big changes. And that's exactly what we have going on here. Looking at it, you might not even be able to tell the difference, but I'll show a quick comparison on screen now of how we can kind of flip back and forth between the two, and looking at them side by side is a great way where you can see those big changes starting to take place over a long period of time. Also, this is why it's really important to take the time to compare between where you came from and where you're going. That way you can kind of see that you are making progress and it doesn't feel like it looks exactly the same. Now that we are closing in on the finish line, this character is going to need a pose. The original illustration by Loish is cropped off at the waist, so I don't know exactly how the full character looks, but I can infer a lot of information based on what I can see. So I can copy the shape language and use some of that to better understand what the legs of this character might look like in this art style. I mentioned in my last video where I worked on Lord Griss's Pineberry Girl that not everything is possible in 3D. And that is true with almost every illustration. The major thing with this piece was the length of the arms. In 2D, it's probably not something that you even noticed. But experimenting with creating the arms at the length they are in 3D made the character start to feel a little too much like Slender Man. I think long arms are a cool aesthetic, but when they are a good foot longer than they should be proportionally, things start to look a little silly in 3D. Which is not the overall vibe that I get from Loish's original artwork, and I want to remain as true to that as possible. During the posing process, something I love to do is stand up and actually act out the pose myself. That's really helpful for figuring out the weight and balance and kind of tilt and shift and everything else for the pose. If you haven't done that before, I highly encourage you to try it out. Something else that's really helpful and important you probably noticed is that I've mirrored the character. I've flipped it around completely in the horizontal axis. This is something that's a really helpful trick to just refresh your eyes, and it's almost like seeing your artwork for the very first time. Finishing touches are what everyone wants to do. The small details can be a lot of fun, but know that it has taken a lot of work building a very strong foundation and refining that slowly to be able to finally add those details on top. Rushing to this stage is kind of a horrible idea. It's like putting sprinkles on top of a turd. At the end of the day, no matter how much time you spend here at the end, it's still a turd. So take your time during the early stages, so that when you do get here, you can have some fun and push your artwork to be its very best. Now we have to call this artwork finished at some point, right? But how do we know when to do that? When you are the art director of your own work, it can be tough to know when to call it quits. That is why I recommend that you have a goal in mind with each project. Even if it's something simple. Maybe you want to create a new piece for your portfolio. You're trying to get the attention of a specific potential employer. Maybe you're just here to have some fun. Whatever it is, being goal-oriented on each project gives you a better perspective on when to say you're finished. Speaking of, we are just about wrapped up on this girl. Just got to do a little dance here at the end. Be sure to check out my Patreon for tutorials, behind-the-scenes content, HD wallpapers of my art, and a whole lot more. There's also my store, where you can get my brushes, and my mentorship program, the Appeal Academy. Give them a look, the links are in the description. I hope that you enjoyed the video. Click that like button if you did, click subscribe if you aren't. You guys have been absolutely fantastic, but it is time for me to get back to work on a new character. These things take quite a while after all. So I'll see you in the next video where I'll be transforming something new from 2D to 3D.